Hey, reader. So, we're here with another interview today that I'm very excited about. I'm going to introduce you guys to Rob. Rob plays locally in our area. I've had the privilege of getting to play on a number of the tables that he has built, contributed to over the tournaments that I've been involved with. And so, I just kind of asked Rob, hey, like, would you like to be on the channel and talk a little bit about kind of both your crafting journey, your wargaming journey, but also how you go about designing tables because I've been a long proponent that board design and table design actually does affect the way that the local meta kind of moves and adjusts. And so thankfully Rob agreed. And so here we are. And so Rob, first of all, welcome to the channel. Just glad to
Thanks
see
for
you
having
again.
me. Appreciate it.
And just want to kind of open the floor to you a little bit here at the start. Just kind of talk a little bit about what got you into wargaming, what got you into the terrain crafting side of wargaming, because they're not the same thing, and just a little bit about your journey that led you where you are now.
I've been gaming about 30 years now. D&D, Shadowrun, Warhammer, you name it. Miniature gaming started basically with 40K back in second edition, actually the very tail end of first, but second edition. And like everybody else, you started out with what you had. So, bottles and cans and books my dad worked for a bar, so he got a big piece of green felt when they redid the pool table. So that green felt is kind of where the mat started out. And I was unhappy with that because the art of our hobby is in the terrain.
Mm,
Um, that's where the storytelling comes from. If you're walking through a hall that has gaming tables on it and they're playing with books and bottles and things like that, you're not really drawn to it. The figures you can't see at that distance,
yeah.
but you can see terrain. Terrain tells the story. And I was pretty hell bent on making some good terrain, and I started out there. Foam and the stuff you learn from books back then, which were, I mean, the internet really wasn't a thing, so
Yeah.
you're learning what you can from a white dwarf, which has very few, you know, ideas on what, how they do what they do. I mean, they didn't even tell you about washes for painting it back then. And it just went from there. And then when I got into bolt action, I'm like, there are famous battles that we get to rebuild. And there's so much wonderful media out there, from video games to movies to books, that we can take our inspiration from. And then we can make cinematic looking terrains. We can make the scene so that when players approach the table, they know what they're doing. They're like, ah, I saw this movie. I remember this. Or,
Mm.
I remember reading about this. And they're immediately put into that world.
That's awesome. And I'm not gonna lie, my first introduction when I started thinking about actually getting into bolt action was I was just casually kind of walking around, I was at like a convention hall or whatever, and I saw the tables and I was like, "Oh, what is this?" And like it was one of those situations where, they were kind of like in a corner sort of area and the larger games like 40K and stuff like that were nearby. And like you could tell the difference. There
Yeah.
was a sudden shift where it's going from like, a flat board with, very clearly symmetrical style terrain on both sides on the one hand, and then you get to bolt action. And like, I mean, there's some interesting stuff going on. You got some road structures going through, like, some forested areas. You've got like, broken parts of a town. And I just kind of came over and just kind of asked them like some questions about it. And, the guys there, they were really nice, even though, they were playing a game tournament setting. They were willing to just be like, oh no, yeah, like, these things give different levels of cover. And of course, back then it was hit modifiers,
Right.
right? Where they were like, a little more exposed, but I get better angles of sight. And like it just like so much was going on in my brain at the time. So I was watching, I'm like, okay, I think I can get into this. This is pretty cool. So like you're right, like it really is part of the draw, and then from there they'll learn about the rule set, they'll learn about how it plays and stuff. But it's that immersive, aesthetic, for lack of a better term, that gets into it that is very, very cool.
And that's one of the big things that differentiates bolt action from games like Warhammer. Warhammer is very much played today on a symmetrical,
Mhm.
sort of this is always how the terrain looks kind of environment. There's no story going on there.
Mhm.
It's we're fighting for the same cathedral that we fought for 3,000 times before.
Right.
Well, you're telling way more of a story with bolt action, and they're real stories. Yeah, we're playing with toy soldiers. It's a plastic mat, but we're recreating something here,
Mhm.
and it can really speak to it with the terrain. That's what makes battles interesting to me.
Oh, well, and toward that end, as we kind of continue onwards, I wanted to give you some time here at the very beginning, just to kind of talk through some of the things that you consider when you're building a board. So in the background here, everyone, you guys can see kind of the beginnings of a North African board that he's been working on. And so just you kind of gave me a rundown of different things that you like to think through, but I kind of want to just pass the mic over to you and just ask like what's going through your brain when you're first developing your own board and you're kind of laying it out and planning it out.
Sure. This is actually rather old here. What we're looking at, this
Okay.
desert setup. I built this maybe about 4 years ago. This was actually for Warhammer 8th edition. I had gotten out of miniature gaming, and
Nice.
then
Yeah, yeah.
8th edition came out, and I'm like, oh, hey, this game's fun again. And so I built this. We still have these pieces. They're not as top quality.
Yeah.
Some of the hills aren't bad, but some of it could have been better. Those buildings are terrible. I've replaced them. Um, but things to consider when building terrain or whatever is the theme to me. That's the key part.
Hmm.
What am I looking to portray at this point? So if if in our group we've been talking like, oh hey, I just got done watching the Pacific, and boy, that was really cool when they rushed the beach. Wouldn't it be cool if we had a beach to rush in the Pacific? Well, that made me think now I need to make some jungle terrain, some Pacific landing terrain, things of that nature. And then I start looking at photos, watching shows, read a couple books, things of that nature that give me an idea of what that ground looked like to those people. Um, but then you start to consider, like, oh, now how can I recreate that with the means that I have at my disposal? I'm not going to go out and start growing palm trees and then maybe try and grow the smallest palm tree ever just to fit a board. No, Amazon's got perfectly good plastic palm trees they stand in. It's never going to be one to one with real life, but you're doing your best. Uh, the other next consideration is usability. So if you've looked at train gardens and things of that nature, they're gorgeous, they're amazing. But to a wargamer, they're nearly useless
Oh,
because there's nowhere to move your men around. There's nowhere to, the tank can't ride over this. They are scenes. They are mostly static. For wargaming, we're not building dioramas. This needs to be usable. In the case of buildings, they need to be kind of destructible or to be able to get into different floors. So that's where that usability angle comes in, is that while I can make the prettiest board ever, if we can never deploy troops on it, it does us no good. Durability, that's another big one, is that you can make it out of paper mache, it'll last you one game, and then you're throwing it out. Um, so you do have to consider the materials you're going to use when building such things. Like we're looking at right here, those roads are made out of flooring tile, linoleum tile that I put some like uh, spackle on and painted them. The hills are generally either foam, or I think the one in the very foreground there is actually cardboard that also has compound drywall mud on it.
yeah.
Then you cover it in sand and whatever. But making it last is key to it. So when you're putting down, say, flock or static grass, you can't just do that first layer of glue, stick the grass to it, and you're done because it'll rub right off after a couple games. So you got to go back and glue over top of it. This is one of those things that I learned a lot about from Mel Bose's book and his podcast,
Yeah.
The Terrain Tutor, is that he has this concept down flat. Here's how you make your terrain sealed and lasting and working. Cost, that's another one. You know, I'm not a millionaire. Like I'm
Neither
rather
am I.
rather poor. So at that, I need to find a way to make this cost effective. There are lots of fancy things if you go to a train or hobby shop, you can find a million wonderful pieces that they would have there, but they're gonna be a little pricey. Sometimes they're fragile too. So, you're almost talking disposable. You don't want to do that. So that's why we use a lot of things like, well, what can I go into Home Depot or Lowe's and just get a bunch of? Well, foam's relatively cheap. It's gone up in years, but still not too bad. And one 8x4 sheet will make you a lot of terrain. Paint, don't use your model paints on terrain. Now, I violate this rule every time because there's a certain color or a certain thing I'm trying to do, but those base colors there, the browns and the tans you see, that's hobby paint. That's it, it's what you get at, the craft store. Buy big buckets of it and have at it, or go to Lowe's or Home Depot and get them to, mix you up a bucket of paint there.
Yep.
You don't want to blow your, expensive paints that I mean, you're like $4 or $5, $8 for one little, 2-ounce bottle of paint. Now, use the cheap stuff on it. Same thing goes with shading and whatnot. You don't want to use Agrax Earth Shade
Yeah.
to darken your materials. Do stuff like I actually make my own now. It's just water, some dark sepia ink, and a little bit of matte medium, a little bit of reducer for an airbrush. You can make a bucket of it, and it'll last you a while. And if you use up a lot of it, it doesn't really hurt that much. One of my next points there is versatility. You want to be able to reuse this stuff. Now, granted, there are some things that we make for a table that is a key point to that table. We'll see some of it later that is like I made this as a showpiece for it. Or like we had at our last big event we did where Mike had made the Arc de Triomphe.
Yeah.
You're not going to put that down on every table, but it's cool for that. But you want to make stuff that's reusable. So these sandbags here, I did them with like a brown base because brown goes just about anywhere. The guys dug up a mound, put the sandbags on so they don't look so weird when put on, say, like a green terrain or here in the desert. You know, brown is your best color for building terrain. You're going to use a lot of brown. Same thing with that Sanger there in the background, the sandbag emplacement. You know, but not everything's versatile. I clearly would not put those hills on a jungle board,
Yeah.
but you do what you can. And the biggest one to me is storage and transport. So you can make beautiful boards. I used to go to Games Day, which was Warhammer's big thing, big event. And when the U.S. branch was headquartered here in Maryland, they'd have it at the Baltimore Convention Center. And you could go in there and see amazing boards that were all made as one piece. So you're talking a 4x6 board that has like a river running through it and giant trees or cathedrals or ever how they do it. But they have specialized trucks that they're moving them on. They have storage units that these things are set up to go in. Since most of us live in a home apartment of something like that, you need to be able to put this stuff away. So I don't generally build one piece boards. I build modular pieces that I can then put in a plastic tub and then take that tub to the next event we're doing or put it away down here in the basement. Um, Things like that make it so that your investment in it is stored away properly, is safe and easy to transport, and gives you, again, versatility because you're reusing and replacing these pieces at each game or whatever. You might have a concept that changes every now and then, or like we'll see later with my Airfield board that kind of goes in one tub. I know how that looks, but yeah, it gives you modularity with your boards.
All this really good advice. And I know like I'm relatively new to bolt action. I've been playing the Middle Earth strategy battle game since 2012, and we started out, yeah, kind of the same way, right? Where you've got like you use books and cups and stuff like that to kind of give you the basics of it, but Yeah, like I think especially starting with that theme, and telling yourself like, okay, like what am I actually shooting for? It does guide a lot of the other processes, but yeah, just finding ways to be able to economize around, along the way because we were recent college grads when we first got
Hmm.
started, so like we had nothing. But you're right. Like, you just kind of slowly but steadily try to find them, find the resources that you can and use a little bit of imagination to kind of make things into what they should be.
And the game and the setting is what moves that forward. Like you were just
Mm,
bringing up the Lord of the Rings, and like say you wanted to do that awesome battle where the the yeah, orcs arrive on the wargs and they're
yeah.
attacking them they're attacking the Fellowship on top of that hill. Um, that all those rocks and crags you'd want to build for that, and that tells your story. Your miniatures are the actors, but if you don't
Mhm.
have a set design, we might as well just be playing with paper
Right.
figures, because it it's what emphasizes what you're doing. Movies have to be on set, television shows, we do too with our war games.
Yeah. It's also a lot of what adds to the tactics behind it, right? And I think this is a useful thing when we're starting to look at the boards themselves. Like, the kinds of terrain that's put down, the quality of the terrain that puts down is going to shape the decisions that people are making when they play the game. And so, for example, just as one example, we have this board of Foy, right? So we have, in this case, we have a ruined town with, I think it's Micro Art Studios. Is that right?
Yes,
Terrain?
yeah, these are
Yeah.
Micro Art Studio
They're
buildings.
so good. Oh my
They
gosh.
are.
I
I
only own a
love
few, but they're
micro art.
so good. Um, but then you've also got like a forest on the opposite side, and then in between, there's kind of almost like a no man's land, right? Where, now you got a lot of decisions you got to make as to, so where are we pushing? Where are we moving? At what point do we move? How much of it is fire first to throw pins down range and then move out? And I love that, where just the design around the board is going to affect the way I play the game.
Right, and I'm approaching the game as, at least from the designer of terrain and how I'm laying it out, I'm writing a script with it.
Mhm.
So this was inspired by the Band of Brothers episode where they assault Foy after the siege of Bastogne. I really liked it because it's something that doesn't happen so much
Mhm.
anymore, which is these over open ground ridiculous charges that Easy Company was required to make against an entrenched German, force. It's a very iconic event, especially in the show. That's where uh, Lieutenant Dyke loses his mind, and Captain Spears is sent in to take the guys on in. There's that cool 88 and I believe they used a Tiger tank. We wanted to use a Panther because Panthers are cool.
Yeah.
Uh, and so that's when we laid this out. And we're also doing this with objectives. And as you were getting to the point earlier of the tactics you use, one of the big things in bolt action versus games of Warhammer and so forth is moving your troops to secure objectives, to secure
Mhm.
terrain. This is much more of a I'm not getting kill points game. This is I'm doing things that further the war, if you will.
Mhm.
So, that's what we're looking at here is that, Easy Company going into this had the job that they had to take Foy from the Germans so that the rest of the army could push on behind them. And that's what you're seeing right here is these poor guys running across almost open terrain and to this German onslaught. And so a lot of the things you're seeing here are we're going for a winter landscape because this happened in January of 1944. So we're going with Christmas trees, if you will.
Mhm.
Which incidentally, these are my wife's aunt owns a shop that sells similar type materials, and they provided me a bunch of these trees. Some of them didn't have snow, so you can get the like Vallejo or AK snow and
Yeah,
put
yeah.
it on it. I noticed that there were these giant bales of hay in that episode. So I'm like, oh, bales of hay covered in snow. Those are 3D printed. I found some files, printed them out,
Yeah.
covered them with snow and so forth. And then the Micro Art Studio stuff is, I mean, that's the greatest. It's out of the box, it's ready to go, and it's cinematic the moment you put it on the field.
Yeah. Well, and toward our discussion point earlier, this is where also the cost thing comes in because obviously, Micro Art Studios is going to cost more than if you go to your local craft store, buy yourself some MDF, and try to make your own buildings. But what you're paying for is the detail, the quality. In the case of this set, they come pre-painted, which is really nice because guys like me are not the greatest of painters. So, sometimes it is nice to just be like, okay, and then these pieces are set. You can just
Yep.
assemble them, which is relatively easy too,
Yep.
in terms of assembly, and storage for them is also relatively easy to do. And so you can just be like, okay, this stuff is good, and now I can focus on the rest of the board in terms of my time and energy.
Yeah.
Just
The only perhaps downside I had looking at this board is that I couldn't put snow on those roofs.
yeah. Well, because
But
again, versatility, right? You may not always
right,
want them to be in a
that's
snowy
where you get
place.
into that.
Yeah.
Yep. So, that I did have to sort of suck up that, all right, we're not going to have snow on the roofs of these particular buildings. But later on, I built a Soviet village where they do have snow on the roofs because it's built to be, in the east.
Exactly. Yeah. And don't need those to all, those same buildings to always be used for, say a summer setting or something else like
Right.
that. Kind of custom.
Another key to this is, and you've probably seen it before, is the mats we use too. Is
Hmm.
that having a lot of different mats is what makes that's your ground. That's where everything starts. So I picked up a couple of um these winter ones. I've got, desert, urban, you name
Hmm.
it. That part does get a little pricey. They run about, 80, $100 these
Yeah.
days, but it is, I guess, the big sacrifice you have to make is that expense, is those
Yeah.
mats. But everything else here is built relatively cheap. I mean, either 3D printed, which means it's pennies.
Yeah.
And these trees, you can get them in packs. Amazon sells bunches of trees pretty cheap, and if they don't have the snow in them, you can stick a little snow on them with a $12 bottle of like AK snow, applique or something like that.
Yeah. Sweet. No, I also I do confess, when I tend to think of boards, I tend to think of things in more of a summer thing. So I always get a big kick whenever I see a winter board, just because you don't see them quite as often. I would imagine across all gaming systems, they're probably slightly more rare, unless you've got a friend who's like really into, say, like the Winter War or something like that. They're probably less likely to be seen.
And that's something in bolt action that you have to consider is that there's so many theaters to
Hmm.
this conflict that I mean, World War II, so we're talking Africa, Italy, Europe, different seasons in Europe, the Pacific. Um, I have yet to build an Iwo Jima board because I'm not happy enough with the idea of, well, it's not just sand,
Right.
it's volcanic sand. It's going to be dark, it's going to be nearly gray, and I haven't found anything that quite satisfies me with that yet, so that'll be an upcoming project one day.
Yeah.
Plus, how do you build Mount Sarabachi and not have it be the entire board?
Right. Or at the very least, how do you make it playable so that way it's not, oh, and we spend half the game just trying to climb up the few paths that go up to the
Yep,
top.
and that's something that you have to consider when building any types of terrain boards is that if you're a rivet counter, like I remember your video was talking about, and I'm sort of, but not all the way, uh, I want to make it as realistic as possible with still making it playable.
Hmm.
Um, if I was actually building Foy the way they showed it, there's more terrain on this than there should have been, and those Americans would have been gunned down the moment they walked across the field.
Yeah.
Um, this is a game, and we need to make it so that there is terrain and terrain is used as blocking line of sight, providing those cover saves now in third edition.
Mm.
Being your objectives. So that those are things that are key that you have to consider when doing this. As I was just saying, you could do Mount Sarabachi, but it's going to be boring.
Hmm.
One person is just going to win,
Yeah.
and that's no fun, especially if we're doing tournaments.
That is true. That's true. Because there is also a difference between like narrative play versus competitive play, right? Like
Exactly, right.
if two people have come and they're like, all right, we are going to live this out, uh, that's one thing. But in the event that you've got something that's a little more condensed, a little tougher for competitive play, trying to find a winner across matches, then it might be more useful to have something that's a little more even-handed.
You need to be balanced for tournaments. You were at the you were our grand champion of the Maryland tournament. And you got to play on some of my boards there. And when I'm doing a tournament board, it's balanced. If a
Hmm.
building goes here on one side, a building goes on the other that counters it. If there's a forest here, there's a forest there. You could still tell your story. You can still lay out thematic and interesting, but you've got to do it in the idea that nobody gets the advantage here. This map we're looking at was not built with that concept.
Yeah.
This is a narrative.
Hmm.
And we'll see others later on that are narrative, but um, yeah, it is different depending on what you're doing, what type of game you're having, whether it's narrative or tournament or competitive, that how you lay out your terrain is important.
Yeah. Oh, it's true. Well, and kind of looking at that, as we look at some of the jungle terrain, we talked about how sometimes you build stuff specific to a board, and sometimes it's designed to be a little more versatile, a little more modular. So I
Hmm.
decided to just kind of include a slide looking at some of the jungle terrain that you've built that, I mean, could be used for a lot of different things, right? You know, it could be used for a beach landing, but it could be used for a local village. It could be used for Henderson Field, right? You know, something like that. There's kind of a lot of different options for it too.
And that's the point of this set. You're actually kind of seeing I gave you these pictures as this is an in progress of when I was actually doing it. My uncle was curious to know how I did this, so I took pictures while I was doing it.
Yeah.
So it's I'm first just, carved out the pieces out of, foam, put drywall mud on them to give them
Mhm.
contours and to fill gaps, covered them in flock. The sort of rough looking stuff on there, the rough looking leaves and whatnot, is Italian spices, so they smell delicious.
So good. So
Yeah,
good. And super cheap.
super cheap. Oh, you can get the hugest bottles of them from Amazon or at the grocery store. Again, I have to say, I didn't come up with this. This is all Mel.
Yeah.
The terrain tutor is where I learned to do a lot of this stuff. I'd known some beforehand, but man, that is your educator.
Yeah.
And then the picture in the middle is actually when it's finally all done. There's been a shade put on it because if you see, the plants are really bright in
Yeah.
the upper pictures there, and I put a wash on all of them to tone that down, and it sort of brings things together. The grasses aren't over the the wood and so forth. But yeah, this is a modular kit. There's emplacements which we can use if we're doing a beach
Mhm.
defense, or sometimes there's just jungle paths, clumps of bushes and trees. All of these are just like plastic plants you can buy off the internet. My wife loves Temu, and she'll order me this stuff all the time. And will my long-suffering wife, I'll mention, having to put up with a nerd like this. um, the barricades themselves, they're I believe I made them with like wooden dowels. Just cut them up into little pieces, and that makes your side walls for it. Barbecue skewers,
Yeah.
etc.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so you end up collecting an odd assortment of items when you're building terrain, but that's also another part of it too. Is that you gather these materials, you got to make sure you have room to store all of them too, and then you'll just be walking by something one day and you're like, hey, that's interesting to use, and let me try it out. My wife got me some moss. I thought this was going to be really cool. Actually, the stuff's kind of unworkable. I can't really
Hmm.
figure out what to do with it, but you try, you learn. Some things end up really great, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what came out of this. And
No,
we've
it
used
makes
this
sense.
multiple times.
Yeah, and it's what makes it the hobby aspect, right?
Yes,
To everything. You know, it's the kind of thing you are going to spend some time, and some of it's going to pay off, and some of it you're going to be like, well, now we learned something. Um,
making terrain is one of those things that if you go in with a hard set of rules and plan, you're just
Mhm.
going to frustrate yourself. Go in with an idea because you can change an idea.
Yeah.
And I go in with, various ideas of, oh, hey, this is how I'm going to lay it out. Oh, no, that doesn't work. And,
Mhm.
you're changing it all up again. So, but a lot of this was just inspired from, watching, movies. And I watched Platoon a couple times because that's in the jungle. I mean, it's
Yeah.
different war, but nevertheless. And, I think Flags of Our Fathers, Letters from Iwo Jima, other
Mhm.
things like that that sort of inspired. Oh, these are mortar pits. They would build up the terrain around them to protect them, or um, these sort of half bunkers or wooden
Mhm.
palisades that you would have for gun positions. So
Yeah. Well, as a guy who loves guns. traditional field guns. I'm not gonna lie, I saw that picture and I'm like, oh yeah, well we're including this one. We're gonna talk about these.
Absolutely. This is where the artillery goes.
Very cool. Very cool. So the next board we're going to look at kind of takes that jungle terrain and it applies it because I think a lot of these are the same pieces, right?
They are, yes. This was sort of an event we did in my basement. My kids are grown up. I've, got an empty nest, so this is what I've done with my life. And my wife has had to put up with, all of this in the basement. But so yeah, 16 feet of Tarawa invasion, which was a bloody, bloody mess. Part of the Gilbert Islands in November 1943. The Americans came ashore. We had a British contingent in here because a buddy of mine's got Brits, but
Yeah,
whatever. Um, and this ended up being gorgeous. Both playing it, playing on it, and looking at it. And both sides, if you're standing behind those entrenchments, oh, how it looks to see those guys coming at you from the beach. And it's harrowing if you're on the beach side and pushing up. I'm not gonna lie, this day went terribly against us. I was playing Americans.
Ooh.
I lost 20 order dice, and I think my opponent lost 4 men.
Ow.
And it started the running joke with us of Chesty Puller, who I have a miniature of, dies in every battle.
Ouch.
But yeah, it's now this was under second edition, so there were a lot of tough rules here. What you're seeing also is those squares. Those are minefields.
Minefields.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they couldn't be any simpler to make. It is a square of wood that washers got glued to, and then I put some modeling paste. I think it's either from Vallejo or AK over it, just an earth effect. Um, yeah, they still do very much look like washers, but washers kind of look like mines. So,
It's true. This is
and
true.
it also makes them cheap, effective. It fits the rules because I believe it was a 6 inch by 6 inch square in second edition. I haven't read Minefields in third, but I assume it's the same. And these went very well with it. You could see the delineated parts of the minefield. I have seen others who do barbed wire and so forth around them. We chose not to do that because it makes them actually easier to store without something like that on them. You just sort of stack them up.
No, that's true. Yeah, I started making some minefields and I very quickly decided, nope, I need these to be easily stackable one on top of each other because they all got to go in the same box. And they won't destroy each other as much that way. Also, yeah, in second edition, actually, fun story, the minefield rules actually changed slightly depending on which book you bought because they were in campaign books, and
Yep.
those were written over the course of close to 10 years. And so, at the very least, yeah, third edition does thankfully have minefields, and they have them in the main rule book now. So now we know exactly what they do, and they are slightly less wordy than the other ones were, which is always nice.
Yeah,
So.
they weren't bad to use. Fun element to the game, but I wanted to make sure that we had something appropriately modeled for them.
Yeah. No, it's brilliant. I love it. And again, simple, right? It's something simple that if as a gamer I'm looking at it tactically, I'm like, okay, I know that if I step into that spot, it's a clear shot to get up toward the enemy defenses, but there's gonna be a roll. See if we step on something, see
Yep,
if we
it's a
roll over
risk.
something. So now I can make a decision, do I try to go through the barbed wire? Do I go through the clear areas they know I'm going to go through and probably have machine guns or anti-tank guns or something like that ready for, or do I want to try going over the minefield? And that's all good.
Yeah, and this played in a lot too with the way the Japanese played because in this one they had their hidden deployment, and they also had the ability that they could move without losing that hidden token because they have tunnels and so forth.
Nice.
Um, Made it very difficult to fight against them, but it was a very fun game.
It's cool. And then finally, and by the way, I'm kind of leading off with some of the more thematic ones, just because, again, like, people who look at World War II, these are the kinds of things they think about. But
Yes.
we will be getting, by the way, for our wonderful viewers, we will be getting to, boards that are more designed toward competitive play and stuff like that a little bit later. But we got to talk about Normandy,
We got to do
because
Normandy.
it's a big thing that gets people into World War II games.
It is. This is your, opening scenes of Saving Private Ryan here.
Yeah.
Now, truth be told, I did not design these boards. These boards were made by my friend Justin, who's a
Hmm.
big player in this community as well here in Maryland. The bunkers, those are mine, as well as the bits and pieces you see about the beach, such as the the boat traps and the hedgehogs, all of which are just 3D printed. So I can't really speak to all the work Justin put into this, but it is foam that he dug out the trenches in to actually, dig them down in. Then we've got some 3D printed and wooden bunkers, some Belgian gates on there. Uh, these were gorgeous to play on. I really love that he did his research for those
Mhm.
stone walls and the little village over there. That was burnt out and so forth. These are things that were part of Omaha Beach, and
Mhm.
he was looking at pictures from that time period and what that beach looked like. So that's why his isn't the traditional, what you see with a lot of the beaches where it's just like sand that goes up a hill.
Yeah.
No, we've got sand that goes up in placements in these draws where the beach opens. Um, it gives a really dramatic look, and it's apparently people had a lot of fun with this one. I did not get to play on this board, sadly, but it
Yeah.
seems to have been a great success with those who did.
It really was. Part of the reason why I included this one is because I got to airdrop onto this because I was playing one of the U.S. airborne units that we ended up sending in. Harrowing, to say the least. I think it took three guys, three American players against one German player, and then me becoming the fourth one. It took us 5 hours or so, 4 or 5 hours to crack through the defenses on this one. So, again, probably not the greatest for competitive play, but for narrative play, I'll tell you this, it felt like it. Like, okay, we are breaking into Europe here. Um, and it really was such a pleasure to be able to play on.
And it seemed like it. I was on the German side on this, and I was talking with our commander, and he sort of gave the guy who was playing on this board, one of our members, Ryan, a
Mhm.
German Festung order. This is, you will stand here and die.
And he did.
He did. It
He
wasn't
fought
until
down
those
like the last two
airdrops,
dudes.
but
It was
man,
crazy. Yeah. Oh,
yeah, very impressive
yeah.
work. It was, oh man, everybody had such a ball there that day, and
Yeah.
yeah, these boards definitely contributed to it.
Yeah. But as we start moving on, I wanted to include, you've also done some work on some airfields and in different setups for different, theater representations and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I mean, airfields are cool. Everybody loves a good airfield. So yeah, just kind of want to give you a chance to be able to talk about those.
Sure. We've got this in a couple different configurations. The one at the top left, we're representing Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, which was an air base that the Marines took over from the Japanese, and this is the Japanese are counterattacking and trying to take the field back. Most of these buildings are from either Sarissa Precision, which makes beautiful MDF buildings. Some of the airfield ones are from a company called Father and Son,
Yeah.
smaller company, but they also make gorgeous buildings, such as some of those Quonset huts and like the radio tower and whatnot. Um, some of it's 3D printed, like you see the tent that we've got on there. And the airplanes are just 1/48 scale models because best of luck to any of you to find 1/56 scale airplanes.
It's so true.
Yeah, they're either way too big or way too
Yeah.
small.
Yeah.
They're close enough. Um, but then in the lower right corner, we're showing it as a German airfield in, say, North Africa. If you've watched the show Rogue Heroes, it's all
Mhm.
about the SAS, and they get to go do cool things where they run onto the field and blow up as many airplanes. And actually that was the scenario. We wrote a custom scenario for this where they got victory points for each airplane destroyed, as well as the fuel tank destroyed. While the Germans got victory points based on kills, although they were getting like 2 times the points,
Yeah.
because the Brits or Americans or whoever in this are trying to run in and run out.
Mhm.
Um, the airfield itself, yeah, look, it ain't to scale. I couldn't possibly make an airstrip because it would run the entire run of the map. So
Possibly longer.
yeah, possibly longer. But it does. It's representational. You get to put it in the field, in the middle of the board. It's just a piece of wood that I painted and put some sand on and so forth. There's barbed wire around it that is
Mhm.
very easily made. You get go to the like Lowe's or Home Depot, and you want to get tile spacers. There's these little
Mhm.
plastic X's and so forth. Paint them brown, glue them, and then the barbed wire you can either buy, the the hobby barbed wire, or I know Terrain Tutor was talking about like there's some specific name for the stuff where you can buy it in bulk. I didn't. I just, But a key thing to any of those making barbed wire is when it comes out of the box, it is very shiny. Barbed wire doesn't look like that.
Mhm.
Coil it up around a couple pencils. I take 3 pencils and wrap it around it. Then I glue it down, and then I cover it. Then I paint it black,
Mhm.
dry brush it gunmetal, and then put a little rust on it, a little
Mhm.
rust effect, which you can do with either watering down some orange paint, or you can get some of the amazing dirty down rust
Yeah.
to go on it, and that makes it a much more realistic looking piece.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other thing that's kind of custom in here is that H right there. That's an emplacement that they use to, if mortars or airstrikes hit airplanes, this would confine it to just that one airplane as opposed to getting all of them in a row.
Right.
And it's just foam with popsicle sticks glued to it, but gets that effect.
It really does. Yeah. No, well, and I love that too, because again, like, it goes back to like, what do you expect to see and stuff like that. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like airfields are a little more rare. It's not the kind of thing most people set out to build. So the moment that I see one, I get pumped when I get to play on it because it's like, man, like when else am I gonna get this chance?
Yeah, and that's the part of it is that nobody wants to just play on, the standard, whatever they are boards, which is maybe a little bit of woods and some rocks and
Mhm.
so forth.
Yeah,
You know, make an event, make every game an event, and
yeah,
you'll enjoy it that much more.
yeah.
This is not particularly balanced. It is, it's kind of not. I wouldn't say this is the best for a tournament, but again, this was a narrative event that we were doing.
Yeah, no, I thought it was great, and I think I did get to play on a variation of the board. Actually, when we did the most recent Maryland State Championship, um, and I think at the very least, I felt the configuration that you had on that day was, I mean, it was pretty fair. I was doing, I think, quarters deployment or something like that, and I was like, each of these quarters offers something very different. It's either a lot of ability to be able to quickly move out, roll out into another sector, which scores you points, or a lot of cover in my home sector. So which one do I want? And I actually really liked that I felt like there were advantages and disadvantages to each of them. And so different
Exactly.
armies would value different things, which is
And
cool.
that's where we talk about the versatility of it
Yeah.
is when you're building it, you've got to be versatile. So yeah, I didn't do this layout for that because it is a tournament. So all the Quonset huts were grouped together. There
Yeah.
was like basically one in each corner or whatever. The theme and all of it still sticks, but you've made it fair for all players depending on whatever scenario they were doing because there was 3 different scenarios. You don't want to have to go in a tournament and redo the terrain for each
Yeah.
one. You know, it needs to be something that you can set up in such a way that it's modular. I set it up to whatever the game requires.
No, and I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was brilliant. As we're looking at the next one, I had a chance to see this one at the narrative event that we ended up playing. I didn't actually play on it, but it's a manor house. So you have a manor building, but then you also have a lot of fields with stone walls and other stuff like that to provide some slowing terrain. You've got some cover from linear obstacles. So it's something very different. But kind of walk through this one for us.
Sure. A lot of things you're seeing here are kind of classics and stays of our gaming. So, the fields, the hay fields, I mean, it's a mat
Yes.
that, you buy them at like Hobby Lobby or whatever, and you just cut it up.
Yep.
And it makes it very convincing. It's easy to store.
Hmm.
Your dudes just sit on top of it and you could say, hey, they're in it. I've seen people use teddy bear fur and things like that where they
Yeah.
get down into it. There's pluses and minuses to both.
Yeah.
This is a little more, I find, versatile that I can do
Mhm.
with it. We're seeing those hay bales again, this time without the snow covering the top.
Mhm.
Um, 3D printed cows and vegetables, as well as the fences and so forth. Um, they're all modular. None of those pieces are stuck together, so that way you can set this up in different ways. The manor house itself is part of a file set I bought of various Normandy buildings and so forth. Later on, we'll see the bigger set of them when we get to Carentan or St. Mariglis or
Mhm.
whatever you're using it as. Um, this was kind of inspired a bit by Breakhorn Manor, which is that famous, I think, second episode of Band of Brothers where they go in
Yeah.
yeah, they
Hmm.
attack the cannons. Uh, you would technically be seeing the other part of this manor with that. The manor is a French manor, which means it's going to have farms and fields and everything like that. We were doing the Follies Pocket for this, so I wanted it to show like the Norman aristocracy and what that would look like. Felice was the capital for William the Conqueror, and it's always been kind of like that Norman capital. And I wanted to show this is what a wealthy, landowner of France would have. He'd have his chateau, and then he would have his, animals and his, plants and so forth, and then a little I put the hedges around it to show that like manicured garden and so forth, and then some trees and whatnot. Uh, yeah, this ended up being a good board for those fighting on it. They said it was
Yeah.
balanced. The building, all the floors come apart. That was a bit of a trick too, is that all these buildings came as just like a solid edifice, and I had to
Right.
digitally hollow them out and so forth.
Mm.
They're all magnetized so that the roofs fit together and whatnot.
Nice.
Um, yeah, you could put some work into this, but it's all modular. Every one of these pieces could be reconfigured in any number of ways to give you a different board every time.
Yeah, no, and I love it. And also for our viewers on the topic of cost, the vegetables, I think that's Custom Miniature Monday, I
It
think.
is
It's
Custom Miniature
is it
Monday. Yep.
Sydney Anderson, I think.
It,
For all of y'all who don't know about Custom Miniature Monday, you should sign up for the email list. You get a free file every week. Even if you don't 3D print, if you know a guy who 3D prints, just be like, "Hey, buddy, I need some of these." And it's a very cheap way to get really good, high quality stuff for a variety of things. Some of it works for historical, some of it's more fantasy-esque. So it really all depends on what you're getting in a given week, but pretty useful stuff. Pretty
yeah,
useful
I'm
stuff. Yeah.
glad to know you recognize them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I signed up. So I
I
got
was
some
thrown with
myself.
them. They're like very unique. You don't see something like that because it is so. The everyday is actually harder to find in most cases than the unique,
This is
and
true.
this
Yeah.
is wonderfully everyday.
Yeah. No, it's true. Like I feel like there's a whole market out there for people who are just making, walls, fences, animals, crops, things like that, just because like we can all technically use it for a
Right.
variety of stuff. I mean, even on the Middle Earth side of things, I use some of them for my Middle Earth stuff too when I'm making like a Shire board, right? So like, you can flip it around quite a bit. It's quite versatile, even across game systems, which
Yeah. In
means it
fact,
will get use.
looking at this board right here, maybe take the car out and you can use this for D&D. You can use this for Warhammer Fantasy. Maybe the building's a little bit too modern. I mean, that is kind of almost French Second Empire or whatever, but you know, yeah, there's more than one game to be played on a field like this, and this is where having terrain like this in your collection, foam hills, those roads. I think I got them off of Amazon. They're just fabric, and you lay them down.
Yeah,
Um, 3D printed bushes. This is universal stuff. It works in almost
exactly.
any setting.
Yeah. And on the topic, by the way, we talked about how I think it's from the same set of buildings, if I'm not mistaken, that you used for the manor house. Um, you got a really epic looking urban fight, and I'm not gonna lie, I love urban fights. I was the first guy in our gaming group for Lord of the Rings to build like an Osgiliath style board, and I just always loved it because you can't see everything because there's buildings in the way and stuff like that. Um, but of course, Bolt Action has actually quite interesting rules for, buildings versus ruins versus, other stuff in terrain. So as you're planning out and laying out this board, what's going through your mind?
Well, with this is so I believe it'll be the third episode of Band of Brothers. Is Carentan.
Yeah.
This could also sub in for Saint Maraglise, which was another town in Normandy. Um, I will say this: the church there is actually from a Bastonia collection, but it's because the actual church that exists in Saint Maraglise is so large it would take up most of the board. So we went with a slightly smaller one. Um, yeah, this is a set of 3D files I got. I think Hartolia miniatures. I'm not exactly
Yeah.
remembering. Or World at War, something to that effect. Again, these digital files were shells though when I got them, so
Mm.
there's no floors to them. They don't come apart.
Mhm.
So a little bit of work had to go into them to make them better fit what we do.
Yeah.
Uh, so you can take off each floor. Most of them are 2 to 3 floors. I put magnets on the bottom of one floor and then in sort of the rafters of the floor beneath it so that they could go together without completely falling apart. Um, we got some statues we made in there, fountains which are 3D printed with just a little bit of Vallejo water effects. Rather inexpensive stuff that looks gorgeous when put in there. And then we filled it out with a couple other things. I've got these tram cars, 3D printed. I don't remember where I got them, but boy, do they sell, the era, as well as some cars and bushes. And the thing that sort of struck out to me when I was putting this together, oh, and there was sort of a train track towards the back there. I don't know if it's really shows up in here, but there was sort of a train station back there, and I just wanted to, sort of bullet point the that we put a train tracks towards the back. And those are just made of wooden dowels because
Yeah.
027 gauge track is really expensive.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's just you can buy the gravel for it really cheap and just some wooden dowels and we're not going to be running electric trains over it.
Exactly.
But when I was first putting this board together, I was like, gee, it's rather just sort of two-tone. It was either tan or gray. I mean, there's a
Mm.
couple different grays, but it's still just tan and gray. And my wife had gotten me all these wonderful little plants and flowers from Timu. So
Hmm.
I made little planters and lane dividers, and that color really makes it pop. And while that might seem a little, we're playing a war game here, do you really need, flowers and whatnot? I'm like, well, yeah, that's what villages look like. That's life, and that also makes it feel lived in. Um, you when you're building something like this, you're clearly going for some level of realism. How much more does it take to just step it up that extra little notch? And I think those really like sort of complete the board by having that pop of color that you would see. It does suffer from a lack of sidewalks. That's something I'm going to be taking care of in the future, but this was a 6 week project that had to be done in a specific time
Yeah.
period. And yeah, so I got done what I could get done, and I think it still turned out pretty good.
No, it turned out awesome. Yeah, I mean, obviously at the narrative event, for example, we didn't have a lot of fighting over this particular board, which
We didn't
I
have any.
I felt was a shame. I was like, oh, it looks so good.
Yeah,
And
it was just the layout of the map. It
yeah,
happens,
yeah,
but
it's okay.
I told our game organizer that I can just bellyache about it for the next 6 months.
Well, Mike's got a thick skin. He'll be fine.
Yes, he will.
He's a good dude.
Yes, he
Um,
is. Wonderful guy.
but yeah, no, I do confess one of the first things I noticed when I was just casually walking through the boards is I was like, "Ooh, I do like how you added that extra color from all of the extra foliage." Because you're right, like it really does cause it to pop a little bit. It keeps you from being like, "Oh, okay," and it's another town in France, right, or whatever. It really kind of just does kind of draw you in because you can see that like there's just a little bit of extra thought and attention brought in. It kind of does bring out the extra details.
Hmm.
So I do
And
love
I
that.
have to give a lot of benefit to the designer of the files
Mhm.
themselves. Yeah, I printed them, but he did the some of the hard work for it. That he clearly did his research. I did some Google Maps down through like Carentan and whatnot, and yeah, that's what those facades look like. Really good research on his point, and that just helps sells it better when someone like me buys their files, prints them out, or
Yeah,
whatever.
that's phenomenal, phenomenal. All right, so now we're gonna head way to the east. I think you actually might have casually talked about the Russian board a little bit before. I wanted to include this one because we've got a river in a really prominent place, and water terrain, of course. Not everything can cross it in our game, so
Yep.
it changes how you play the game and what you choose to do.
And it makes something like that bridge very important. We are playing objectives here. You can see some little Soviet objectives around there, the little, um, communism logos, as you will.
Yeah.
So, the bridge was one of them. I believe there was a ford in the river that one could get over. Actually, there were two fords that we said only infantry could use, but, vehicles, of course, are going to need that bridge. So it made people playing on this important that there's a reason to have these besides them just being the objectives for the game. This is strategic to me actually playing the game. If I
Mhm.
want to get close to my enemy, I need these fords, I need this bridge.
Mhm.
It's more than just a dot on a map. It means something to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this was built to be sort of like the Vistula Oder counteroffensive from the
Mhm.
Soviets around January 45. We were having Soviets here dug in against or excuse me, pursuing Germans who
Mhm.
were attempting to escape and having a rear guard action here. Yeah, so we're reusing those trees, those
Mhm.
the winter trees. Again, it's the winter mat again. You're going to see those hay bales that are covered. Um, Things that do make a different an appearance here that didn't in the previous pictures we were looking at is we have this 3D printed village, this Soviet village. Again, I think I got these files from Hartolia.
I think so. Yeah, because they're on my mini factory. I think that's where I
Yeah,
found them. Yeah.
and then we're also using some of the Warlord demolished village that they have. I actually have three sets of that because I have it with different grounds because it tells a great story and it's a
Yeah.
good model and it's really inexpensive.
Hmm.
So you're getting a great model that's easy to use and reuse, and the only difference being is whether it's brown grass, white snow, or green grass or what have you. Um, these hills, foam. I like the idea of having. There's a trick with snow is that snow can also get very bland. Like we were just talking about the previous board of, you know, be nothing but grays and tans. Well, an Arctic board could be nothing but white.
Right.
And while if you look at a lot of photographs, yeah, it really is like that, but that's also kind of boring
Yeah.
and you need that color pop to move things around. So I found some flock that is like a frosted grass, and that's what I add to those just to have a little bit of color change in them. We're also seeing some entrenchments I made here. These are, again, it's just foam with some popsicle sticks. There are some things I kind of consider with building those. So, like, if I'm building my entrenchments and I'm expecting them to be German, I'll usually use flat planks of wood or like corrugated for for metal, because they more purpose built theirs. Soviets are just going to cut down a tree and stick it up against the wall. So these
Right.
are rounded logs that I'm using, just round
Mhm.
sticks that I'm sticking there. They're built at more necessity than function. That sort of German engineering doesn't go in. It's the Russian, well, that'll do, and it does.
Mhm.
Uh, Yep, and then we've got some muddied roads here that are just made out of I think it's like balsa wood or slightly thicker. That I got some of the AK mud effects.
Mhm.
Just put that down there. It's slightly glossy, and a couple drops of water effects on it, different places here and there. That gives you that Rasputitsa like Russian muddy road that you're going to get stuck in,
Yeah.
and it feels more, do I really want to run my tank down this? Now, we use them as regular roads, but you could easily do something with this. Well, no, that is that muddy road, and well, maybe your tank gets down it, but it can only do it at slow, and wheeled
Mhm.
vehicles can't use it at all,
Yeah.
which is weird because you'll see a road and be like, ah, that's for my, that's where I can run that truck right across the field.
Mhm.
Well, maybe not, and that's where terrain sells that effect.
Mhm. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, just on the whole, I think just kind of looking at it, I love how there is, obviously some variety as you're looking at it. Some of the areas are a little more dense, some of the areas are a little more open, which is nice because some armies they want a little more space, or they're partisans and they got a lot of bodies, right, or something like that. So they need physical space to put people when they're deploying stuff. But at the same time, it's like, well, do I want to dig somebody out of a place that's a little more dense?
Mm-hmm.
That's the trade-off, right? And so I do love how, even as early as turn zero, when you're first choosing which side of the board you want to be on, like there are a lot of thoughts just
Yeah, and
even by looking at it. So
you're putting thoughts into this. Now, again, this is more narrative. That's why
yeah.
there's entrenchments. That's why the Soviets have the village. Things like that. Or perhaps this might have been a Russian breakthrough, a German breakthrough. I don't quite remember what the details all were of it, but yeah, we do more narrative events when I host games in my home.
Yeah.
Um, and then of course, when we go to like the game shop or whatever, those are going to be mostly like competitive events where we balance the field a little bit better.
Yeah. But no, I love it. I love the, the snow effects on the buildings are fantastic, by the way. So huge fan of those. And again, it also fits really nicely, like we were talking about, when you know that this is going to be stuff that's going to be devoted to a specific board with a specific theme and a specific time of year.
Hmm.
It works out really nicely. One last thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about, Rob, is, any other resources that you would recommend to people? Um, because, I know some people, they might be new to the hobby and they don't really necessarily know where to go, when they're
Right.
first starting off.
Terrain is one of those very niche parts. You can find lots of different video makers who will show you how to paint your models, be it Warhammer, be it bolt action, fantasy, whatever it is. Not to throw shade at, Duncan Rhodes or any guys like that, but they are almost a dime a dozen. You can always find a guy to easily show you how to paint your miniatures. And I eschew all of them and paint more like a factory than an artist, so it's irrelevant anyway. But wargame terrain is kind of a niche. Um, a great place you can start with are hobby train magazines.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of inspiration there, but it has to be inspiration and not the actual way you're building, your
Mhm.
methodology, because that's meant to be a static diorama, and we're
Mhm.
playing with our terrain. So
Right.
you can see how and techniques how to build and make things, but you've got to also remember that they're not building them to be played upon. Two books we're looking at here. One is the very classic Games Workshop How to Make War Games Terrain. This was one of the first books that I ever read on
Mhm.
terrain making. And while one GW makes an awful lot of assumptions about the ability of people to get a hold of certain greebles and items and so forth. And but this was the 90s in Warhammer, and it was
Mhm.
it was as punk rock as the game was. Everybody's out there doing their own thing with it, but it gave you a great place to start. I mean, it's going to show you how to make some wonderful rocks. It's going to show
Mhm.
you how to make some wonderful like forests, and it's not always going to tell you exactly what to get it. And not to put too weird a bent on it, but like it is very British. And
Mhm.
for someone in the States, when you first read it tells you to go to your local DIY store, I didn't know what that was in the early 90s when it told me to go to DIY. How was I supposed to translate that means Lowe's or Home Depot? It's
Yeah.
do it yourself. You know, they'll tell you to go to Tesco or whatever over there. Well, excuse me, we're a little different here. Um, so you do have there is that change on things which is slightly different. More modern is what I would say, Mel Bowes today, the terrain tutor,
Mhm.
is probably one of our best resources on how to make war games terrain. I'm not going to say his videos are for everybody. Mel has a very specific way of presenting things, and he's oh so wonderfully British. Um, so let's crack on. But his techniques are phenomenal. What he
Mhm.
shows you how to make, and he's doing it always from the right mindset.
Yeah.
He's got cost in mind, he's got use in mind, he's got theme in mind, and he's got durability in mind and storage. And like one of the great ones is when he makes his D-Day board. He makes it modular so the pieces can be moved around.
Yeah.
And when Justin made his D-Day board for us, he took inspiration from Mel and did the exact same thing. They are
Mhm.
slightly less modular than Mel's is, but also Mel he gets contracted by companies like Warlord,
Yeah.
like Games Workshop to actually make boards for them. So he's getting paid to do this, so he has a
Mhm.
budget. We're doing this as a hobby generally. Nobody has
Right.
yet paid me for a board. And I wouldn't take their money anyway. I don't think I'm good enough for that. Um, but yeah, so he's going to have a little more professionalism with what he pulls off with his boards than one should expect at home. Same thing with
Mhm.
it, if you're watching Vince Venturella or so forth with your
Yeah.
painting, you're not going to be Vince. Try hard, work your way towards becoming Vince, but be happy with what you get, and just try a little bit harder each and every time to do that next step. So Terrain Essentials is a great one to that's his book that he put out. He has his own site, the Terrain Tutor, which goes over it. There's other, just Google how to make war games terrain. I don't remember the guy who did it, but he made the Break War Manor, the actual scene from Band of Brothers. And it is a gorgeous board. I'd love to make a board like that. Downside again is he has a static board, as in like this is always going to be six
Right.
feet by 4 feet of solid plywood that he's going to have to store somewhere. Most of us don't have room to do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, all of this is good, and I'm going to try as best I can to link to a bunch of the stuff down below, just so that way it's a little easier for people to be able to access. Um, but yeah, Rob, until we see each other again, hopefully at the next event, whenever that is, thank you so much for joining us and for kind of lending from your experience. Because I mean, even myself, I like technically I've been wargaming for a while, but I'll be honest, my terrain game is not as strong as it should be for how long I've been in the hobby. um,
Eh, everybody finds their niche. I found making terrain. I get to write my story here.
yeah.
I've got other things too, 3D printing and whatnot, but like, I don't know, it's become something I just thoroughly enjoy doing.
Mm.
It relaxes me and gives my opponents, my friends, my other game people I game with something to use that I'm contributing, and it makes me feel more like part of the community by doing such a thing.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing with us. I know I've really enjoyed this time. I hope it's been
Well,
really
thank you
good
for
for you
having me.
as
I
well.
really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll have you back on again because I know we didn't touch that much on like, 3D printing and things to consider and stuff like that. But, as a fellow 3D printing guy, and you've done a lot of 3D printing as well, I think that might also be a very good resource for, some people starting out. So, tune in next time to
Tune
hear
in next
Rob
time.
talk about that. And yeah, we'll see if we can't set up another call. That'd be great.
Sir, thank you very much.
Cool. Well, hope that you all have enjoyed this, and we will see you next time.